For 2, I tell the fairy tale about Briar Rose and her prince. And we do the Roman numeral 2 and the Arabic number 2. For 4, I do the 4 seasons, usually. And the Romans in the beginning did 4 this way in the Arabic. The Roman numerals symbolize 4 and 5. The V is the closed fingers with the thumb outstretched. For 5, I do the famous person in the Pentagon. Da Vinci did a much better one. But I have the children stand up and look at each other in that way. And Roman numeral 5 and the Arabic 5. For 6, I do the Star of David, and I might tell a story, a simple story about David. The 6. For 7, I do the rainbow, including indigo, which makes 7 colors. For 8, a star made with 2 squares. Now 9 is a hard one to do. I just do 2 configurations of 9. And here I do the subtractive 1 less than 10. One of my clients told me that she made a cake with 9 ingredients, and they drew the 9 ingredients on the page. And for 10, they're 10 fingers. They draw around their fingers and then color them. So when we say quality of numbers, we're addressing the feeling process that these children have, their need for feeling in their learning. And when we can associate it with themselves and with things that they love, with stories that they love, we're teaching them through their feelings. And we have more of a quality of numbers than just numbers as quantity. And I think that's a good way to start with numbers. Also, the 10 fingers really give them the association that our number system is a base 10 system. And the reason it is a base 10 system is because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes. And for early human beings, those 10 fingers and 10 toes were really important for computation. And they didn't deal in quantities more than 20 because they only had 20 things to count on until they developed something else. If we look at a child, the child recapitulates human cultural evolution from birth right on. And so it's around age 7 that the child comes to the point in human cultural evolution when written language was developed. And written language is, or was, originally based on pictures. So we teach them the alphabet through pictures also. The letters are learned by telling a story. You might tell a story about a snake for S. The snake can easily be drawn as a picture, as an S shape. The word begins with an S, and so the story of, say, the story of the white snake is an appropriate story to tell the children. when you're teaching them the letter S. M might be taught by drawing a picture of a mountain. And there would be a beautiful picture of a mountain in their book. And then they, on the opposite page, might draw an M that resembled that mountain. And so you go through the whole alphabet that way.
For the next hour, about the curriculum and how it's related to this 7 to 14. Well, actually for about a half hour, the 7 to 14 age group. And then I'll quickly cover the 14 to 21. Because I figure that most of you are probably interested in this. First grade, we start with fairy tales. Fairy tales in the beginning are just fairy tales. And they've been hearing fairy tales when they were at kindergarten age as well. Simpler stories. And then we give them a little more complex stories. And later this afternoon when we talk about storytelling, I'll talk a little bit more about fairy tales. But when you buy a fairy tale book, especially the big, complete Grimm's and complete English, remember that many of these tales were meant for adults. They were learning experiences for adults. They're not meant for children at all. For instance, there are 2 turnip stories. The one turnip story is an English fairy tale, and it's very simple. It's about a grandfather who goes out to pick a turnip, and it won't come out of the ground. So Grandma comes, and she pulls on Grandpa, and it still won't come out of the ground, and so on. Then there's another turnip story that's in Grimm. It's a horrible, horrible story. And you would never tell it to a child. Most adults wouldn't want to read it either. So fairy tales are representative of our inner work, our inner life. The prince isn't an earthly prince. He's the youthful masculine that's in all of us, whether we're male or female, young or old. We all have a prince inside of us. We all have a princess, the youthful female. We all have a king and a queen and a bad guy of some kind. We have a dark side. And these fairy tales allow us to begin to work on our inner life on a very subconscious level. We carry these stories into our sleep life. They're like a dream, and they're designed to be that. So if you're like me, you probably are or have gone through a stage where I don't want to tell these stories to my children. They're not politically correct and they're sexist and all that. And then when you realize that they're talking about our inner work, they're like our dreams, then you become a little more comfortable with working with them with your children. So you would start with a couple of tales, a couple of main lesson blocks of fairy tales, just fairy tales for the fun of it. And then later on in the year, you would have some main lesson blocks that were to introduce letters with fairy tales. Now, when I'm saying main lesson block, Waldorf education is set up in such a way that the children study one thing at a time. They spend about an hour and a half on their main lesson. It's not this idea that mainstream schooling seems to have, that no child can concentrate on anything for more than 20 minutes. And so they move from one subject to another every 20 minutes. In Waldorf, the main lesson is the main thing that they're studying. It goes on from 3 weeks to a month. And the other subjects rest during that time. If you're doing a main lesson block on fairy tales, your math would be resting, except for the little games like the one that Dee Dee and I played, which you would do during your morning circle time. So you would maybe have 4 main lesson blocks, say 4 months of doing fairy tales spread over the year, and interspersed with 3 or 4 math main lesson blocks in which you would approach math as in an artistic manner. And you would have a period of time each day when you did some handwork. In first grade, they make their own knitting needles out of wooden dowels, and they learn how to knit. And they make very simple things, and I'll talk more extensively about that tomorrow when we talk about handwork. They would play pentatonic recorder as part of their circle time. And you just heard the recorder. Thank you, Dee Dee, because I wasn't getting anywhere getting people to sit down. I'm glad you're all talking to each other. That's good. And in a Waldorf school, they would learn a foreign language by total immersion to start with. They wouldn't get any grammar until about third grade. It would just be in a room with a teacher, maybe 3-4 times a week for an hour, where they talk about cultural things, hear stories, play games, talk about food in the language. If you're homeschooling, and you know another language, by all means, have a period of time when you use that language, because your children are in the prime of life to learn a new language, somewhere between 3 and 8 or 9. They learn really quickly, and they get a good accent. We had a Thai exchange student come and live with my daughter, and she had, when the girl came, he was about 4 and a half. And these great big long Thai words that, you know, it's a tonal language. He could pronounce them so easily. His mother and I and his father just struggled with those words. We could imitate her, and then we'd promptly forget what it was that she said. But he could do it so easily. So if you have a second language, by all means, have one meal a day where you only speak that language, or you can even speak that language completely at home and never use English, and they'll still go into school as first graders and learn English just like that. We met some people at family camp, and there was a Christian community family camp down near Melbourne, and there were some German people there. And they spoke only German to their children, but the children spoke perfect English, even the 6-year-olds. So they learn it really, really fast. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the schedule, because many of you don't know how the Waldorf daily schedule works. The day would be started in a classroom. The children would come in, and the teacher would shake each child's hand and say hello to them using their name. And then when everyone was there, they would light the candle, and they would start their circle time. And the circle time might include saying a morning verse. And there is a morning verse that's spoken in all the Waldorf schools around the world, translated in different languages. And then they would sing a couple of songs, play the recorder. Once a week, do some form drawing during this time. And then they would do some kind of movement to warm up their bodies. I don't think you'd have to warm up bodies in this climate, but you need the circulation going anyway, whether you're warm or cold. And the children would do silly, fun movement things. They might move to a poem, make up motions for a poem, or they might do some of the math games, tossing beanbags, passing beanbags, balls, jumping rope, that kind of thing. And then they would move into their main lesson block, which would then take about an hour and a half. And when that was over, they would say a verse and take a break. Usually it's lunchtime or tea time by then. And then in the afternoon, do handwork or foreign language. So it's again, a rhythm that's always pretty much the same. Now the main lesson from one day to the next changes a bit. The first day, the teacher would tell the story, or with older children, introduce the material, which is in story form for good part of this 7 to 14-year-old time span. And then the children would artistically produce something that had to do with the story. Perhaps sculpt something out of beeswax, draw or paint a picture that had to do with the story, act it out. It could be any one of these things, but some kind of artistic rendition of the story. And the teacher would usually lead that activity by drawing a picture herself. She might come in the morning with the picture partly drawn, work on it a little bit in front of the children, and then allow the children to make their own pictures. And it's not necessary that the child copy the teachers, but young children often do. And somewhere around the end of first, by the beginning of third, they begin to draw their own pictures and just get ideas from the teacher. And that would take the hour and a half. This picture or this artistic rendition is carefully and neatly done. It's not something that's scribbled out and gets stepped on in the car on the way home from school. It's treated with reverence, and it's a beautiful thing when it's done. And the teacher saves it and keeps it in a main lesson book. Oftentimes it's done right in a book, but it can also be done on paper and then assembled as a book later. Then the second day of the main lesson, there would be a review of that material. The children would reenact the story, perhaps, retell the story to each other, maybe take some puppets that are in the room and act out the story with the puppets. In some way, recapitulate the story. And in first grade, that's pretty much all that would happen. Maybe they draw the letter if they've been introduced to a letter. By second grade, they come up with a summary of the story, and then the teacher would write that story. The children would kind of dictate what they want, and the teacher would control the number of sentences or number of words so that it wasn't too much to write. And she would write it on the board or on a large piece of paper, and the children would copy it into their main lesson book. So you have a 3-part lesson. There's the original presentation, the artistic rendering of it, and then the recapitulation or the summary of the story so that the children remember it. And then they can read what they've written. And usually, even if they're not reading yet, they can read what they've written. And if you think about how human beings developed, they only read what they had read, because that's all there was to read. And then they began to read messages from other people, and gradually written language developed. So that's pretty much how the day goes. Now, I talked a little bit about how math is taught. In first grade, we also introduced the 4 functions. And we introduced them as little gnomes. Multiply, plus, minus, and divide. And there's a lovely story that goes with that. It's in my math book. And then you continue to work with these gnomes for jewels in the